Ethan Ward reclined in his modest apartment on Earth, gazing out of the window at the sprawling cityscape beyond. His life, though unremarkable by human standards, had taken on a peaceful monotony since he had returned from his diplomatic work among the stars. He had traveled to far-off planets, met incredible beings, and forged bonds that transcended galaxies. But nothing had been as profound as his friendship with Xylith, a Riggery alien who defied every expectation of his species. Xylith had been one of the few aliens who embraced human culture with a strange fascination, especially Earth's art and humor, even if he didn't fully understand it. Ethan remembered the aliens' deep laugh whenever they would exchange stories about their homeworlds. Xylith always said he found human emotions weirdly chaotic but intriguing. Over the years, their friendship became a rare treasure for Ethan, an anchor amid the vastness of intergalactic politics. It was a quiet evening when Ethan received the transmission that would upend his tranquil life. A hologram flickered to life in his living room, showing a somber-looking Riggery legal representative, their segmented face sharp and cold. The moment the representative spoke Xylith's name, Ethan's heart sank. "We regret to inform you of the passing of Xylith, son of the House of Kairos, on the planet of Riggera," the alien began, his voice devoid of emotion. "In accordance with his final wishes, you, Ethan Ward, have been named as his sole heir." The words hung in the air like heavy fog. Xylith was dead. Ethan couldn't believe it. The Riggery lived far longer than humans, and his friend had been in the prime of his life. "I know this news may be difficult for you, Mr. Ward," the representative continued, "but your presence is requested on Riggera for the reading of the will and transfer of assets." Ethan was speechless. How could Xylith be gone? He had only received a message from him a few months ago, joking about an upcoming art exhibit on Riggera that Xylith wanted Ethan to visit. Now, the idea of visiting Riggera without his friend felt unbearable. The next few days were a blur. As much as Ethan wanted to stay on Earth and grieve in solitude, he felt obligated to go. Xylith had been more than a friend, he had been like family. Before he knew it, Ethan was aboard a transport ship heading to Riggera, a planet bathed in purple hues and steeped in ancient traditions. When he arrived, Ethan was met by Xylith's estate managers, a group of stoic Riggery who guided him through the opulent halls of Xylith's estate. The grandeur of the place only deepened Ethan's sorrow. Xylith had always been more humble in his behavior, but this estate was massive, with gleaming white pillars and intricate carvings depicting Riggery myths. Ethan was led to a grand room where several Riggery dignitaries stood waiting, their expressions inscrutable. The head estate manager, a tall Riggery with silver eyes, approached him. "Mr. Ward," the manager said in a deep, resonant voice, "you have been named Xylith's heir. His entire fortune, including all property, businesses, and assets, now belong to you." Ethan was stunned. He had expected maybe a few personal items, mementos of their friendship. But an entire fortune? "I don't understand," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "Why would Xylith leave all of this to me?" "Xylith's will was very specific," the manager replied. "He trusted you above all others. And with this inheritance comes a great responsibility." Ethan frowned. What kind of responsibility? The room grew even quieter as the manager gestured toward a set of large double doors at the end of the hall. "Follow me." With a growing sense of unease, Ethan followed the manager through the doors and into a private chamber. As they entered, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Standing in the center of the room was a woman tall, elegant, and undeniably alien. Her skin was a soft lavender hue, her eyes a shimmering gold. Her features were sharp yet delicate, her long, flowing hair the color of midnight. She wore a flowing gown that seemed to ripple like water with every movement. There was something both ethereal and intimidating about her presence. "This is Lyra, Xylith's wife," the manager said softly. "And now, according to Riggery tradition, she belongs to you." Ethan's mind reeled. "What?" The manager remained calm. On Riggera, when a husband passes, his wife is bound to his heir, ensuring the continuity of the family line. It is our custom. Ethan stared at Lyra, who met his gaze with an unreadable expression. The weight of what the manager had said began to sink in. Xylith had not only left him his fortune, he had left him his wife. But this is... I can't just. She's a person, not an object, Ethan stammered. I can't own someone. Lyra's golden eyes narrowed slightly. I am not owned, human, she said, her voice cool and melodic. But I am bound by my people's customs. Xylith trusted you, and so I must as well. Ethan didn't know what to say. He had come to Rigora expecting to mourn his friend, but now he was faced with a responsibility he never could have imagined. How could Xylith have put him in this position? I don't want this, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't ask for any of this. Neither did I, Lyra replied quietly. But here we are. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Ethan's thoughts raced as he tried to process everything that had happened. Xylith's death, the inheritance, Lyra. It was too much. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of alien customs and expectations that he didn't understand. The estate manager stepped forward. You are free to take your time, Mr. Ward. The will has been executed, and everything now belongs to you. Xylith trusted you to care for his legacy, and that includes Lyra. Ethan turned to Lyra, who was still watching him with those piercing golden eyes. There was a strength in her gaze, but also a vulnerability that she was trying to hide. I don't know how to do this, Ethan admitted. Neither do I, Lyra said softly. But we will figure it out together. Chapter 2, Navigating Alien Customs. Ethan had barely slept since his arrival on Rigora. The weight of the inheritance pressed on him, but nothing felt heavier than the knowledge that Lyra was now his responsibility, or, at least, that's how the Rigori customs framed it. Xylith's fortune, his estates, and businesses all seemed trivial compared to the complexity of handling the delicate situation with Lyra. Ethan had no idea what to say to her, much less how to approach the situation. To make matters worse, the legal obligations imposed by Rigori law were uncompromising. He stood on the balcony of the estate, overlooking the rolling lavender hills that stretched far beyond his sight. The sky, a deep indigo, was dotted with two pale moons. Rigora was a beautiful planet, but at this moment, all of its beauty was lost on him. His mind raced as he grappled with the customs he couldn't understand. Lyra's presence was constant, though she never intruded. She was graceful and dignified, always moving with purpose, yet there was a quiet tension in the air between them. Ethan found himself avoiding her, not because of who she was, but because he didn't know how to act around her. She was tied to him by a culture he didn't belong to, bound by customs that he felt were alien both literally and figuratively. One evening, after several days of awkward distance, Lyra approached him on the balcony. Ethan, lost in his thoughts, didn't notice her until she spoke. Do you plan to avoid me forever, human? Lyra's voice was calm but edged with something unreadable. Ethan turned, startled. He saw the faintest hint of a smirk on her lips, though her golden eyes remained serious. I'm not avoiding you, Ethan said, though it sounded unconvincing even to his own ears. I don't know how to deal with all of this. You don't have to be tied to me. I'm sure there's a way to change these customs. I could appeal to the Rigori Council or something. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. You don't understand. This isn't just about custom. Xylith chose you. And I respect his decision. Ethan frowned. But you're not an object, Lyra. You don't have to live your life based on someone else's will. Lyra tilted her head, her expression softening just slightly. You misunderstand. Xylith and I had an arrangement. He was my husband, yes, but our bond was one of respect, not of possession. He trusted you because he believed you would care for his legacy, and for me. I am not asking for your pity, nor am I asking to be freed from this bond. I am asking that you honor his trust. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, feeling even more lost. But I don't even know where to start. Xylith's world, this world, it's all so different from mine. I don't know your customs, your ways. I feel like I'm going to mess everything up. Lyra's gaze softened further as she placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a strange calm through him. You're not alone in this. Xylith chose you because he knew you would struggle, but he also knew you would try. That is what matters. Ethan stared at her, surprised by the depth of her words. He had never seen this side of her before. Behind the regal demeanor and alien beauty, there was wisdom and compassion that caught him off guard. Tell me about Xylith, Ethan said suddenly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Tell me what he was really like when I wasn't around. Lyra's eyes flickered with an emotion Ethan couldn't quite place, perhaps sadness or fondness, or maybe both. She let out a soft sigh before speaking. Xylith was difficult, at times, she admitted. He was stubborn, proud, and often reckless. But he had a good heart. He cared deeply about those he called friends, and he saw you as one of his closest companions. In many ways, he admired humans, your adaptability, your resilience. He believed that Rigora had grown stagnant, too rigid in its ways. That's why he wanted you to inherit everything. He thought you would bring change. Change? Ethan raised an eyebrow. I'm just one man. What kind of change could I possibly bring? Lyra smiled faintly. Sometimes, it only takes one person to shift the course of a world. The silence that followed was comfortable for the first time since Ethan's arrival. He felt a connection to Lyra in that moment, a shared understanding that transcended their different cultures. Perhaps this wouldn't be as impossible as he had imagined. Will you help me, then? Ethan asked, his voice quiet but determined. I don't know how to handle all of this, but I want to honor Xylith's trust. I can't do it alone. Lyra nodded, her eyes glinting with something akin to approval. Of course, Ethan. I will guide you, but you must also be willing to learn. Rigora is not Earth. Our customs may seem strange to you, but they are a part of who we are. Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't going to be easy, but with Lyra's help, he felt like he could at least try to navigate this new world. Over the next few days, Lyra began teaching him the intricacies of Rigori culture. She explained the significance of the estates, the businesses Xylith had owned, and the political alliances that were now in Ethan's hands. It was overwhelming, but Lyra was patient, walking him through every detail with a calm, methodical approach. Despite the complexities of the inheritance, Ethan found himself drawn more and more to Lyra. She was fiercely intelligent, with a dry wit that caught him off guard, and there was a quiet strength about her that he admired. She never showed vulnerability, but Ethan sensed that there was more to her than she let on. One evening, as they sat in the grand library of the estate, Lyra paused in the middle of explaining a particularly convoluted legal agreement. Xylith used to joke that you were more Rigori than most of our people, she said with a small smile. He admired your ability to adapt, to see beyond the surface of things. Ethan chuckled softly. He was always flattering me. I don't think I've ever really understood Rigora or its people. Not fully. Perhaps not, Lyra agreed, but you try. That's more than most would do. There was a moment of silence before Lyra spoke again, her voice quieter this time. Do you regret coming here? Inheriting all of this? Ethan looked at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her question. He considered his answer carefully before replying. No, he said softly. I don't regret it. I miss Xylith, and I wish things were different, but I don't regret being here. Lyra met his gaze, her golden eyes searching his for a moment before she nodded. Good. The bond between them, forged through shared loss and the weight of responsibility, was growing stronger with each passing day. Ethan still had no idea what the future held, but for the first time since arriving on Rigora, he felt like he wasn't completely out of his depth. Chapter 3, The Weight of Legacy. Ethan stood in the middle of Xylith's vast office, trying to make sense of the sheer number of holographic displays surrounding him. Reports, legal contracts, and messages blinked in and out of view, each one a reminder of the massive empire he had just inherited. Xylith's estate wasn't just a simple inheritance, it was a sprawling network of businesses, investments, and properties, all tied together by the late alien's meticulous hand. Ethan hadn't realized just how vast his friend's fortune was. He swiped through the projections with frustration, his hands shaking slightly. Mining contracts, real estate ventures, luxury art dealerships. Xylith had been involved in industries that spanned multiple planets. Ethan had no experience with any of it. He had worked as a diplomat and had spent time navigating alien cultures, sure, but running an empire like this was another thing entirely. Each document he opened seemed more incomprehensible than the last, written in legal jargon and references to rigorous customs he barely understood. Xylith, what were you thinking? Ethan muttered to himself. His heart ached as he thought of his old friend. The news of Xylith's sudden death had come as a shock, but the weight of this unexpected responsibility made the loss feel even heavier. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the holographic displays and the occasional tap of Lyra's fingers against the control panel on her desk. Ethan glanced at her, still uncertain about the arrangement that bound them. Lyra had been Xylith's wife now. By the ancient laws of Rigora, she was tied to Ethan as part of the inheritance. The thought was bizarre to him, and it felt wrong on so many levels. Everything's running smoothly for now, Lyra said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. Xylith set up his businesses to be self-sustaining. You don't need to make any immediate decisions. Ethan sighed, leaning back in Xylith's enormous chair. That's not really the problem, Lyra. I'm overwhelmed by all of this. It's like I've been thrown into the deep end of a pool I've never swum in before. Lyra stood from her seat and walked toward him, her lavender skin shimmering in the soft light of the office. There was an air of grace and poise about her, one that seemed unshakable. Her golden eyes met his, and for a moment, Ethan saw a flicker of understanding behind them. Xylith knew you weren't a businessman, Ethan, Lyra said softly. But he trusted you for a reason. He believed in your ability to learn, to adapt. Ethan gave a bitter laugh. I'm not so sure he was right. I don't even know where to start. Lyra tilted her head slightly, studying him. You've already started. By being here, by accepting this, you've taken the first step. Now, we take it one problem at a time. He looked at her, appreciating her calm confidence but still feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. What about you, Lyra? You didn't ask for this either. How do you feel about being he hesitated, struggling to find the right words, being bound to me because of this inheritance. Lyra's expression softened, and for the first time since they had met, Ethan saw a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. It was not what I expected. But I respect Xylith's wishes. He cared deeply for you, Ethan. And, in time, I believe you and I will find our way through this. Together. Her words lingered in the air between them, the unspoken understanding that they were both trapped in a situation neither had asked for but were determined to navigate. Before Ethan could respond, a chime echoed throughout the room. One of the holographic displays lit up with a new message, this one marked with a red priority symbol. Ethan's stomach sank. What now? He muttered as he tapped the display to open the message. The screen flickered to life, revealing a stern-looking Rigori official with dark blue skin and silver tattoos etched across his face. His expression was severe, his eyes narrow with contempt. To the current executor of the House of Kairos, the message began in a cold, clipped tone. This is a formal notification from the Trade Council of Draker. We hereby challenge the ownership of mining operations located in Sector 12 of Draker's Moon, citing a breach of territorial agreements following the death of Xylith, son of Kairos. Ethan's heart sank as he scanned the rest of the message. The local government on Draker was claiming that Xylith's death nullified his ownership rights over a lucrative mining operation. They were demanding that Ethan relinquish control of the mines or face a lengthy legal battle. Great, Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair. Now I've got interplanetary politics to deal with. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she read the message over his shoulder. This is not unexpected, she said, her voice tight. Xylith's passing left a power vacuum in some regions. There are those who will see your inexperience as an opportunity to seize what they believe they are entitled to. Ethan's pulse quickened. What do I do? I'm not equipped to handle this. I don't even know if they're right about the territorial agreements. Lyra shook her head. They're not right. Xylith's holdings were secured by treaties that are still valid, even after his death. This is a political maneuver to test your resolve. If you back down now, others will follow suit, and you'll lose control of more than just the mines. Ethan felt the weight of her words settle heavily on his shoulders. The thought of engaging in a political battle on an alien world was terrifying. But he couldn't ignore the truth. If he didn't stand his ground, Xylothe's entire legacy could crumble before his eyes. "Do I have any legal recourse?" he asked, trying to suppress the rising panic. Lyra nodded. "The Trade Council will meet to discuss the challenge. You'll have the opportunity to defend your claim, but it will require more than just legal knowledge. You'll need to show them that you're not a weak human who can be pushed aside." "Right," Ethan said, swallowing hard. "No pressure." Lyra placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "You won't face this alone, Ethan. I'll be with you every step of the way." Her words gave him a small sense of relief, but the looming challenge ahead still felt insurmountable. Ethan had never been one for confrontation, especially not in a setting as formal and high-stakes as a trade council meeting. His diplomatic work had been much simpler, negotiating small treaties, building alliances, resolving cultural misunderstandings. But this was a fight over power and territory, and he had no idea how to play that game. Still, he couldn't back down. Xyloth had trusted him with this, and Ethan wasn't about to let his friend's empire fall apart just because he was scared. "I'll do it," Ethan said, straightening his posture. "I'll go to the Trade Council and defend the claim." Lyra's eyes gleamed with approval. "Good. I'll start preparing the necessary documents. You'll need to be briefed on the legal aspects and the key players involved. The Trade Council can be ruthless, but if we present a strong case, we can win." Ethan nodded, though his mind was already racing with questions. How would he present himself as anything other than an inexperienced outsider? How could he convince a room full of powerful Riggery officials that he was capable of upholding Xylothe's legacy? As Lyra returned to her work, Ethan stared at the holographic display, the message from Draker still flashing in front of him. He had no choice but to face this head-on. The stakes were too high to ignore. The day of the Trade Council meeting arrived far too quickly for Ethan's liking. The grand hall where the council convened was an imposing structure, its towering columns and intricate carvings designed to remind visitors of the power held within its walls. As Ethan and Lyra entered the hall, the eyes of dozens of council members and officials turned toward them, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had spent the last few days absorbing as much information as he could, memorizing key legal precedents and familiarizing himself with the political landscape of Draker. But nothing could prepare him for the intensity of the council chamber. The council itself was composed of 12 members, each representing different sectors of Riggery trade and politics. At the head of the chamber sat the High Counselor, an elderly Riggery with a long, silver mane and piercing green eyes. His presence alone commanded respect, and Ethan couldn't help but feel like a mouse entering a lion's den. The Draker representative stood at the center of the chamber, his posture rigid and confident. He wasted no time in launching into his argument, detailing the supposed breaches in territorial agreements and claiming that Xylothe's death had nullified any legal claim to the mines. Ethan listened, his palms sweaty, but he kept his focus. When the representative finished, it was Ethan's turn to speak. With Lyra at his side, Ethan stepped forward. He could feel the weight of the room's gaze on him, but he took a deep breath and began. "Honorable members of the Trade Council," Ethan began, his voice surprisingly steady despite the nerves that had been swirling inside him all morning. "I stand before you today not as a native of Rigora, but as the legal heir to Xyloth, son of the House of Kairos, a man whose legacy reaches far beyond this chamber." He glanced at Lyra, who stood beside him with her hands folded gracefully in front of her, her expression calm and supportive. Her presence steadied him, and he drew strength from the knowledge that she had faith in him, even if he was still struggling to believe in himself. "The claim presented by the Draker representative is based on an incorrect interpretation of the territorial agreements," Ethan continued, his voice gaining confidence. "These agreements, established long before Xylothe's death, were clear and legally binding under Riggery law. Xylothe's holdings, including the mining operations on Draker's moon, remain protected by the House of Kairos and, by extension, me as his heir. The Draker representative, a tall, imposing Riggery with dark, segmented skin and sharp blue eyes, sneered. A human dares to lecture us on Riggery law. This council has no obligation to recognize the claims of an outsider who inherited his position by mere chance. Xylatha's death voids any claim to those lands, and Draker's interests will not be compromised by an earthling who barely understands our customs. Ethan felt a flush of heat rise to his cheeks, but he kept his voice level. I may not be Riggery, but I know that your laws are based on principles of fairness and justice. Xylatha's will, as you know, is ironclad. The transfer of his assets to me was done in full accordance with Riggery tradition. His businesses, his lands, and his legacy are not something that can be taken away simply because he is no longer with us. The High Counselor, who had remained silent until now, raised a hand, silencing the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the chamber. His piercing green eyes settled on Ethan, his expression unreadable. You speak well for an outsider, Mr. Ward, the High Counselor said, his deep voice resonating through the hall. But words alone will not sway this council. The representative from Draker has raised valid concerns. Xylatha's death has indeed created uncertainty, and we must ensure that the interests of Riggery are protected. Ethan's heart sank. He had known this wouldn't be easy, but hearing the High Counselor's words made the challenge feel even more insurmountable. He needed to find a way to turn the tide in his favor. Lyra stepped forward, her posture as regal and composed as ever. High Counselor, if I may, she said, her voice smooth but firm. Xylatha's legacy is not just about ownership of land or resources. He was a man who valued cooperation and fairness. The agreements he made with Draker were not merely transactional, they were built on mutual respect and a shared interest in the prosperity of both parties. To undermine those agreements now, after his passing, would be an insult to his memory and to the principles that guide this council. The High Counselor's eyes shifted to Lyra, his expression softening slightly. Lyra of Kairos, your words carry weight, as always. But you must understand that this council must act in the best interests of Riggery as a whole. Xylatha's absence leaves a void, and we must be cautious in how we proceed. Ethan could see the tension in Lyra's posture, but she remained composed. I understand the council's concerns, she said. But I ask that you remember who Xylath was. He did not make decisions lightly, and he would not have entrusted his legacy to Ethan if he did not believe in his ability to carry it forward. The House of Kairos has always upheld the values of fairness and honor, and I believe Ethan will continue that tradition. There was a long silence in the chamber, and Ethan could feel the weight of every gaze on him and Lyra. The Draker representative shifted uneasily, clearly sensing that the tide was turning against him. The High Counselor finally spoke again, his voice thoughtful. Xylath was indeed a respected member of this council, and his contributions to Riggery's prosperity cannot be ignored. While there is merit in the concerns raised by Draker, I believe that the spirit of Xylatha's agreements must be honored. Ethan Ward may be an outsider, but he stands as the rightful heir to the House of Kairos, and we cannot dismiss his claims simply because he is human. The Draker representative's eyes flared with anger. But High Counselor Dash. The High Counselor raised a hand, silencing him. Enough. This council will not entertain further challenges to Xylatha's will without substantial evidence. The mining operations on Draker's moon will remain under the control of the House of Kairos, and any disputes will be settled through the appropriate legal channels. A sense of relief washed over Ethan as the decision was made. He had done it. He had stood his ground and, with Lyra's help, defended Xylatha's legacy. The Draker representative glared at him one last time before storming out of the chamber, clearly frustrated by the outcome. Ethan took a deep breath and glanced at Lyra, who gave him a small, approving nod. You did well, she said quietly. I couldn't have done it without you, Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The enormity of what had just happened was still sinking in, but for the first time since arriving on Riggery, he felt like he had made real progress. As they left the council chamber, the tension that had gripped him began to ease. The challenge was far from over, there would undoubtedly be more obstacles ahead, but for now, Ethan felt like he had taken his first real step toward proving himself worthy of the trust Xylath had placed in him. Outside the grand hall, the twin moons of Rigora shone brightly in the sky, casting a pale light over the landscape. Ethan and Lyra walked side by side, the cool night air refreshing after the intensity of the council meeting. "You've done more than just defend Xylitha's legacy today, Ethan," Lyra said as they walked. "You've shown the council, and everyone watching, that you are not to be underestimated." Ethan glanced at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lyra. You knew exactly what to say, how to handle them. I'd be lost in all of this if you weren't here." Lyra looked at him, her golden eyes shimmering in the moonlight. "You give me too much credit. You were the one who stood in that chamber and made your case. You're more capable than you realize, Ethan. Xylith saw that in you, and now others are starting to see it too." Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't expected. He still had a long way to go, but today had been a turning point. He was beginning to understand the responsibilities that came with Xylitha's legacy, and with Lyra by his side, he felt like he might just be able to handle them. As they reached the gates of the Kairos estate, Ethan paused, looking up at the stars that dotted the night sky. Xylith used to talk about how the stars were a reminder that no matter how big the galaxy was, there was always something bigger out there. Lyra nodded, her gaze following his upward. "He believed that we are all part of something greater. That's why he built what he did not for himself, but for the future." Ethan smiled softly. "I just hope I can live up to his expectations." Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "You already are." Chapter 4, A New Path Forward. The days following the Trade Council meeting were a whirlwind of activity for Ethan. News of his victory over the Draker representative had spread quickly, and the sudden shift in public opinion was palpable. Where before there had been skepticism and doubt about his ability to manage Xylitha's empire, now there was cautious respect. People were still unsure of him, but they were starting to take him seriously. The Rigori officials who had once dismissed him as an outsider were now more measured in their approach, treating him as the rightful heir to Xylitha's fortune and responsibilities. But with that newfound respect came a barrage of demands. The estate staff and business managers were suddenly more eager to seek his approval on decisions, and messages from other planetary leaders and business partners flooded in, all requesting meetings to discuss trade agreements, partnerships, and future ventures. The sheer amount of information was overwhelming, and Ethan found himself spending hours in Xylitha's office, trying to make sense of it all. Lyra, as always, was by his side, guiding him through the intricacies of Rigori law and politics. Her presence had become a source of comfort for him, a steady hand in the storm of responsibilities that threatened to engulf him. Over the weeks, their relationship had evolved into something deeper than just an arrangement based on Xylitha's will. They had become partners, working together to uphold Xylitha's legacy, and Ethan had grown to trust her more than anyone else in this strange new world. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings, Ethan and Lyra sat together in the grand library of the Kairos estate. The vast room was filled with towering bookshelves, each packed with ancient texts and records of Rigori history. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. "I never realized how much work Xylith must have done to keep all of this running smoothly. It feels like I'm barely staying afloat, and I've only been doing this for a few weeks." Lyra looked up from the datapad she had been reviewing, her expression thoughtful. "Xylith had years to build his empire and learn how to manage it. You've been thrown into the deep end, but you're handling it better than you give yourself credit for." Ethan gave her a tired smile. "Thanks, but I still feel like I'm just fumbling my way through this. Half the time, I don't even understand the decisions I'm making." Lyra set the datapad aside and stood, crossing the room to stand by the window. She gazed out at the gardens below, where the lavender blossoms glowed softly in the moonlight. "You're learning. And you're not alone in this. I'm here to help you, and so are the people Xylith trusted to run his businesses. You don't have to do everything by yourself." Ethan stood and joined her by the window, looking out at the peaceful scene outside. "It's hard to let go of control, though. I feel like if I make one wrong move, everything Xylith built will come crashing down." Lyra turned to him, her golden eyes soft with understanding. That's a natural fear, but you're not going to let that happen. You care too much to fail. There was a long silence between them as they stood by the window, the only sound the distant chirping of alien night creatures. Ethan felt a strange sense of peace in that moment, standing beside Lyra in the quiet of the Kairos estate. For the first time since he had arrived on Rigora, the weight of his responsibilities didn't feel quite as heavy. You've been a constant through all of this, Ethan said softly, breaking the silence. I don't know how I would have managed without you. Lyra's eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite read, and for a moment, her calm exterior seemed to waver. You give me too much credit. I'm just fulfilling my duty. Ethan shook his head. No, it's more than that. You've gone above and beyond what anyone could expect. You've been there every step of the way, guiding me, teaching me. And not because you have to, but because you care about Xylitha's legacy as much as I do. Maybe more. Lyra looked away, her expression becoming more guarded. Xylith meant a great deal to me. I swore I would protect what he built. But it's more than just that, isn't it? Ethan asked, his voice gentle. You're not just doing this because it's your duty. You could have resented me for taking his place, but you didn't. You've treated me with respect, and I'm grateful for that. Lyra remained silent, her gaze fixed on the gardens outside. Ethan could sense that there was something unspoken between them, something she was holding back. He wasn't sure if it was his place to push, but he felt compelled to reach out to her, to offer the same support she had given him. You don't have to carry this burden alone either, Lyra, Ethan said quietly. Whatever happens, we're in this together. She turned to him, and for the first time since they had met, Ethan saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. Together, she repeated softly, as if testing the word. Yes, I suppose we are. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of everything that had happened between them lingering in the air. Ethan didn't know what the future held, but he knew that Lyra had become more than just a partner in this venture. She had become someone he deeply respected, someone he was beginning to care for in ways he hadn't expected. The moment was interrupted by the soft chime of a communication alert. Lyra's datapad blinked with an incoming message, and she quickly turned away to check it. Her face tightened as she read the message, and Ethan could see that something was wrong. What is it? He asked, concerned. Lyra turned back to him, her expression serious. It's from the Trade Council. There's been a new challenge to Xylitha's holdings, this time from a faction within the Rigori political elite. They're questioning the legitimacy of your inheritance. Ethan's heart sank. Another challenge? We just dealt with Draker. What now? Lyra's eyes narrowed as she read through the message. This is more serious. The faction challenging you is powerful, and they're claiming that Xylitha's will was not properly executed according to Rigori tradition. If they succeed, they could strip you of everything. Ethan felt a surge of frustration and anxiety. But the will was clear. How can they challenge it now? They're using an old legal loophole, Lyra explained, her voice tense. It's a long shot, but if they push hard enough, they might be able to sway the council. We need to act fast. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation crashing down on him again. What do we do? Lyra's expression hardened with determination. We fight. We gather evidence, call in favors, and prepare a defense. Xylitha's legacy is too important to let it fall into the hands of those who seek to undermine it. And you she placed a hand on his arm, her touch firm, you need to show them that you won't back down. You've proven yourself once before, and now you'll have to do it again. Ethan nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He was tired of being seen as the outsider, the human who didn't belong in Rigori politics. This time, he would stand his ground and fight for the legacy Xylith had entrusted to him. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, legal briefings, and strategy sessions. Lyra was tireless, coordinating with Xylitha's former allies and digging up every piece of legal precedent she could find to support Ethan's claim. As they prepared their defense, the bond between them grew even stronger. They were no longer just two people tied together by circumstance, they were partners, united in their fight to protect Xylitha's legacy. When the day of the hearing arrived, Ethan and Lyra stood side by side in the grand hall of the Trade Council once again. The faction challenging Xylithus had brought their best legal minds, and the tension in the room was palpable. But this time, Ethan felt more prepared. He had Lyra at his side, and together, they had crafted a defense that was as solid as the foundation of the House of Kairos itself. As the hearing unfolded, Ethan found himself speaking with more confidence than he had ever expected. He challenged every point made by the opposition, refuted their claims with facts and legal precedent, and reminded the council of Xylithus' wishes. By the time the hearing ended, it was clear that the council had been swayed in his favor. The challenge was dismissed, and Xylithus' will was upheld. Outside the council chamber, Ethan let out a long breath, the tension finally leaving his body. Lyra stood beside him, her expression calm but pleased. "You did it," she said quietly. "Xylith would be proud." Ethan smiled, feeling a deep sense of relief and accomplishment. "We did it. I couldn't have done it without you." Lyra met his gaze, and for a moment, there was something unspoken between them, something more than just gratitude or respect. Ethan wasn't sure what it was, but he knew that their bond had deepened beyond mere partnership. They had gone through challenges together, stood united when everything seemed to conspire against them, and emerged victorious. The connection between them felt solid and undeniable, a feeling that unsettled Ethan just as much as it comforted him. Outside the Trade Council's chambers, the warm breeze of rigorous evening air rustled the towering trees that lined the estate grounds. Ethan and Lyra stood side by side, the tension from the hearing finally dissipating. Ethan glanced at Lyra, watching as her normally composed and stoic expression softened in the glow of the twin moons above. Her golden eyes, normally filled with determination, shimmered with a gentleness he hadn't seen before. "I don't know how to thank you enough, Lyra," Ethan said quietly, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "Without you, I don't think I would have stood a chance. Every time things seemed impossible, you were there to guide me through it." Lyra's lips quirked into a small smile, but there was something bittersweet in her gaze. "You did the hard part, Ethan. I merely helped you find your footing. Xylith saw something in you, something that even I doubted at first. But you've proven yourself not just to me, but to the entire council." Ethan shook his head, unable to fully accept the praise. "I didn't know what I was doing half the time. I still don't. I just kept going because I knew Xylith wouldn't want me to give up. But you he paused, searching for the right words, "you were more than just a guide. You became my friend, and I couldn't have gotten through this without you." For a brief moment, Lyra's eyes softened further, and her hand reached out to gently brush against his arm. The touch was light, barely there, but it sent a warmth through Ethan that he couldn't ignore. "I didn't expect this," Lyra admitted, her voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "I thought that when Xylith was gone, I would only have his legacy to hold on to. But now, it feels like I've found something new. Something I didn't realize I needed." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had felt the growing closeness between them, the unspoken bond that had formed through their shared struggles. But hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way that both excited and terrified him. "I think I feel the same way," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "This started as something I didn't understand, something I wasn't sure I could handle. But now, it's more than that. I want to protect Xylith's legacy, yes, but I want to protect you too, Lyra. You're not just a part of his legacy, you're a part of mine now." Lyra's golden eyes searched his, and for the first time, her carefully guarded demeanor seemed to crack. There was vulnerability there, a flicker of emotion that she had kept hidden for so long. "Ethan, she began, but her words faltered. She took a breath, steadying herself. "You are not what I expected. When Xylith named you as his heir, I resented it at first. I thought no human could ever understand what it means to be part of the House of Kairos, to carry the weight of that responsibility. But you proved me wrong. You've earned my respect. And my trust." Ethan felt a surge of warmth in his chest. Lyra's words carried more weight than any victory they had won together. Earning her respect had been harder than any challenge the Trade Council could have thrown at him, and now, standing here under the glow of Rigura's twin moons, it felt like something even more profound was beginning between them. He took a step closer to her, his hand gently reaching out to take hers. "Lyra, I know this is complicated. Our cultures, our worlds. Everything about this is different. But I want you to know that whatever happens next, you don't have to face it alone. We've already been through so much together, and I don't want to lose what we've built." Lyra's hand tightened around his, and for a moment, she simply looked at him, her gaze filled with a mix of uncertainty and something deeper, something that mirrored the way Ethan had started to feel about her. "I've spent so much of my life thinking about duty, about honor and legacy," Lyra said softly. "But with you, it's different. You've shown me that there's more to life than just fulfilling obligations. You've shown me what it means to care. For someone else, in a way I never thought possible." Ethan's heart raced. He had never imagined that his friendship with Xylith would lead him to this moment, standing here with Lyra, the woman who had once seemed so distant, so unreachable. But now, everything felt different. Their connection was undeniable, and though the future was uncertain, Ethan knew that he didn't want to walk this path without her. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Lyra. I don't know where this will lead us, but I want to find out. Together." Lyra's eyes glistened in the moonlight, and for the first time, a soft, genuine smile spread across her face. She stepped closer, closing the small distance between them, and rested her forehead against his. "Together," she whispered. In that quiet, intimate moment, the weight of their shared responsibilities faded into the background. All that remained was the connection between them, the bond that had grown stronger with every challenge they had faced. Ethan felt a sense of peace, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. In the months that followed, Ethan and Lyra continued to work together, solidifying Xylitha's legacy and navigating the intricate web of Riguri politics. But their relationship had deepened into something more than just a partnership. They became inseparable, not only in their duties but in their personal lives as well. Together, they forged a new path forward, one that honored Xylitha's memory while building something entirely their own. Ethan had come to Rigura as an outsider, an earthling who didn't belong in the world of intergalactic empires and alien customs. But now, he was part of something greater. He was no longer just Xylitha's heir, he was a leader in his own right, and with Lyra by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges the galaxy had to offer. The Kairos estate, once a symbol of Xylitha's legacy, had become their home, a place where they could build a future together, filled with the promise of new adventures, new challenges, and a bond that transcended worlds.